lived in University Heights. I know a lot about the area, the types of houses, and had some experience with landlords there. And just based on like my knowledge of the area, I do see a lot of absentee landlords, a lot of landlords that have, a lot of property in that area. It's like a handful of landlords that own all of those houses in University Heights. So I thought it was very interesting that we found that evictions were happening in high numbers there. So I think, definitely this is something to look into further. And I would love to see, what the breakdown is for, exactly even like why they're being evicted, or, what the demographics are in that area. So I think that it's definitely something that could be its own entire studio is looking at just that hotspot. But I think that's just my impression based on having lived there, having known a lot of people who've lived around there. I don't know if anyone else wants to contribute to that question as well, but thank you, Rose.
I could add a little to that. So I do also know from past classes that the presence of students within the 14215 zip code does kind of make data collection for that area a little bit tricky. Just for things like the census, when those goes around, a lot of students just straight up don't answer the census. And if they do, a lot of times when you have students, income is not the best. So it does also kind of lower the income levels for the area. But kind of like Asher said, just kind of from knowledge of living in the region and dealing with landlords in the area as well, it really wouldn't be surprising. Again, high amount of absentee landlords. And then I do also know certain students who, once the pandemic hit and they also lost their jobs, those landlords weren't really willing to work out something with them.
Yeah, just one more thing again, just to kind of go along that point. I think that there could be an issue with, simply people not knowing their rights, like within that area. Like, I think it's a lot of young people. I personally did not have a huge experience with, evictions and how exactly the process works. So I think that, not to generalize the entire, population that lives there, but I think that because there is a lot of young students there, that could also be an issue, that they just, don't know what to do in the event of an eviction or an eviction notice. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and adding to that, it seems to be like a culture of how landlords are operating their properties there. I know I've heard from plenty of people, including myself, that as soon as they moved out, there was some reason that they were brought to court by their landlord. And plenty of times the reason that happens is because that's just common practice, and they know that a lot of people aren't going to get a lawyer and they're going to show up and represent themselves, and it's not going to go in their favor, as most of the time it does not go in the favor of the tenant in housing court. That looks like all the questions we have as of right now. Does anyone have any more questions that they'd like to pose?
Oh, yeah, I did have one question. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, on one of your slides, you were showing some of the comparisons of kind of the local policies between Pittsburgh and Detroit and Buffalo. And I saw that Pittsburgh had, some type of a local initiative to consider expanding the moratorium beyond the pandemic. But I'm aware of, some other cities that have some other kind of approaches to dealing with really kind of like the wage side of housing affordability. And I know that in Los Angeles, they just came up with a kind of pilot program for basic income, where they would, provide low-income households with, $1,000 stipends on a monthly basis, so that they could, kind of close that gap between, their housing and other kind of household needs and what their income covered. So, knowing that, you're looking at 3 different states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York, and these 3 metropolitan areas that have, slightly different kind of, kind of employment foundations and, presence of some large kind of multinational employers that might contribute to those kind of programs. Where do you see something like a basic income program potentially emerging? And, how would that be something that could be replicated in one of these Rust Belt cities that you see other kind of older industrial cities like Los Angeles pursuing? I mean, is that an option that could be put on the table to, address some of the issues that households are facing in terms of meeting their housing affordability problems?
I can take a stab at this one. One interesting development is that there are now federal proposals to give monthly checks to all families with children below a certain age, and it has sort of been recognized by universal basic income proponents as a potential step towards a larger or broader UBI programming. One of the challenges, and at least in the way that the policy literature is shaped, is that there isn't yet the eviction policy literature is predominantly focused on the idea of rental assistance, and rental assistance specifically for that sort of emergency rental gap that happens. And so where the policy literature around eviction is starting to talk about these longer term solutions, UBI was one of those things that I thought we would see more of, but hasn't really like penetrated the eviction prevention literature specifically. So it's certainly an area for further and future research as case studies like Los Angeles start to see what kind of impact it has.
Thank you for that response, Nathaniel. I'm not sure if we have another person who wants to respond to that as well. Does anyone else want to respond to that?
I guess I'll add one thing. It's not directly parallel, but obviously the standard practice, at least in New York, is Section 8 housing vouchers, which covers portion of rent based on income. But what we find with Section 8 is that it does, landlords are discriminatory. Not all landlords are willing to take vouchers, and also people that have those vouchers tend to be concentrated in certain neighborhoods. So I think one of the things to think about, if there is a type of UBI, even if it is, rent-based, is it going to actually, are landlords going to be willing to take the people that receive it, the recipients on? And is it going to concentrate, people poverty in one area, or is it going to give them a chance to, to have mixed neighborhoods in terms of income?
And then to add to that too, and Nathaniel touched on it a little bit, but a lot of the policy is written from a kind of a mindset that's unrealistic for people's hardships. So like Justin said, things like Section 8 or other vouchers that are already out there are very limited in scope of what you can apply them to. You're kind of giving people money, but there's all these different strings attached to it and what you can do with it, which just really isn't truthful to the hardships a lot of people are facing. And also, like Nathaniel said, you'd expect UBI to kind of become something more prevalent, but it just seems like municipalities are kind of still a little bit regressive in their thinking of policy and are sticking to that model of, oh, we could just use different ways to provide for affordable housing without kind of connecting the dots and saying that, these certain industries aren't paying enough to afford this housing in the first place.
Great. Well, if that's the end of our questions, Thank you, everyone, for joining us, both on WebEx and on YouTube. Professor, I don't know if you have any comments to close us out with.
Rob, actually, I wanted to interrupt. Rob, do you have any questions additionally? No? So I think this is a really long the live streaming out via YouTube and also WebEx plus a live streaming studio system. So I hope you enjoyed actually about this system, and hopefully we can have anyway our own video which will be turned on in our final presentation at the department. So hopefully this is really enjoyable, and thank you so much for all the time, and also the thanks Rob and Sarah and Rose. Your participation was really great. Thanks so much for that, and I hope we can meet again in the department presentation date. So thank you so much, and hopefully enjoy the time, the remaining day. All right, now we will. Great. So now we will just cut everything, and then YouTube will turn off, and then the team just remain a little bit for more talk about ours in terms of the plan and others. All right.